Hi. Okay, so today we're going to finish book 4 of Dbg Book. And we're going to begin here. It was just pretty simple constructions, so I went ahead and translated it. So our guy's subject of excedunt and colloquant. So I just translated as the charioteers, meanwhile, little by little, withdraw, or you could say go out of if you want to take a more literal stance from the battle, and thus gather chariots. That was pretty straightforward. And then here, it gets a little more complicated, but if you translate it in order, it actually isn't too terrible. So that if, illy, those men, right, that would be our subject of premontur. So if those men are oppressed or are pushed by a multitude of the enemy, and then here we finish our results clause, I think you would, as a result clause, a result clause, so that they would have an unimpeded retreat to their men. Expeditum with recaptum. Alright. The next one is pretty easy too. Thus, these two, right, are accusative right here, and equitum and peditum are genitive, describing their respective accusatives, or possessing their respective accusatives. And then we have one verb. So, thus, they show the mobility of the cavalry and the firmness of the infantry in battle, or the stability, steadiness of the infantry in battle. It doesn't matter. And then we have ak, and. And then here's where it gets less clear and simple. All right. So we begin with ak, and for us, we're going to translate in order except for tantum. Tantum is an adverb, so it needs to be translated with the verb. So we'll wait off on that one, but the rest of them we can translate. So, and by daily use and exercise or training, they do so great. Or make so great as we're both. I'm sorry, I keep yawning today. Those are both do and make, are just kind of odd verbs. But what we're trying to understand is that that they had to use daily. They had to do this kind of activity with the cavalry daily. They had to exercise it daily, so that when it was done, it was done well. And then we have a result, or a cause, a clause of cause, a causal clause. That sounds too many clauses. Because uti is another form of ut, so we're going to have that. And then we're going to actually translate from all the way down here. I know, it's frustrating, but this is the only main verb. And all of these sustenere, moderare, making it do something funny here, we'll underline it. And sustenere, insistere, and recipere. Oh, I've missed one. All of these are what we would call complementary infinitives. We've talked about this last year, but the word consuerent means like to be accustomed to or to be used to. That word doesn't make a lot of sense in and of itself, right? If I just came up to you and said, I'm accustomed to, you would expect me to complete that with something like, I'm accustomed to eating or running or whatever it is, right? But with, again, I'm sorry. But the issue is that we need an infinitive in Latin to complete that meaning. I am accustomed to run, or I am accustomed to sleep. So those would be complementary infinitives. They complete. Complementary, not like complement, but complementary like complete the meaning of our main verb. So we have all these infinitives, and we need our main verb to be translated so that these complementary infinitives don't just sound like a bunch of odd two-verb statements. All right, that they would be accustomed, or you could say they would be used to you, to hold sustenere hold incited horses are accusative. And then when they're going to tell us to hold these horses, right, to have control over these horses in sloping and headlong, in a sloping and headlong place. And to be accustomed to hold, and to govern quickly. You could say manage quickly, or control quickly. And to direct and to turn, and to direct and to run along a pole. And that's a weird statement. It'd be a pole of a chariot. Now, per here, you'd think run through a pole. Because per is a compound here, we really don't translate this per. And sometimes you'll see that happen with words like, I'm trying to find the word. Right on the other side. With words like this one here. So excedunt can by itself mean to go from or go out of. And so if I had translated this as to go from the battle, we wouldn't have technically translated this X, right? Because we wouldn't have said go from, right? And so I like withdraw, it's a stronger verb. But the idea is that sometimes when you have this compound verb and you have the preposition attached to the verb, and it is later used in the sentence with the same main verb, you don't always translate it like we do here and like we're doing here with per. All right. So, and rung along the pole of a chariot, they're still talking about the horses, right? To govern the horses quickly, to direct the horses quickly, to run the horses along the pole of a chariot, and to stop on the yoke, and from that place or thence, because it's a fun word, take themselves back most quickly in. Sorry, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. So we're here at, so and take themselves back, part of this verb, re meaning back. Citissime would be quick, most quickly. And then in curus, in chariots. All right. Okay. Because if you read through this, you see this passive participle here, and then we have this other ablative statement here. We can fiddle with it a little bit, but we'll understand that rebus, quibus rebus is going to be providing us with the means, or telling us how they were disturbed. So with our men disturbed by which things, and they explain to us which things. By the newness of battle, at the most opportune time, remembering this is a superlative adjective, so most opportune time, Kaiser brought help. This tempore opportunissimo, yeah, would be called an ablative of time. It tells us when something happens. We'll see one actually again later. So this isn't usually used willy-nilly with like random words. It's going to be used with words that indicate time. So either tempore or dies or noctis, so day, night, time. I guess they could do ora for hour. Those are usually the contexts when an ablative of time is used. So at the most opportune time, right? So at this time, so at the most opportune time, Kaiser brought help, and indeed, by his rival, Eus Adventu, the enemy. So literally it would be the enemy stood firm, but if their enemy is standing firm, that means they're not moving if stopped. You could also put stand first. Our men so recovered recovered themselves from fear. Right, I'm talking about up here. Their men were disturbed. Now they are, because the enemy stopped due to Kaiser's arrival, the soldiers of Julius Caesar are feeling better now. All right. Okay. So with that having been done, okay. After this all the way to this is actually an indirect statement introduced by that word, arbitratus. So it is a participle that's going to be describing the subject of continuit, who's Kaiser. And so with that having been done, having thought, and then we're going to use that, indirect statement. And our indirect statement, our verb of indirect statement, our infinitive is going to be this essay. And it would be very odd to translate this little bit first, because it doesn't make complete sense without our phrase below, that the time was unfavorable for arousing or harassing the enemy and for joining in battle. He kept himself. So we're out of our indirect statement now because we finished with arbitratus. And now we're with our main verb. So he kept himself, say, in his which is an odd way of saying that he didn't move, right? He stopped where he was. He stood firm. And with a brief, you could also say a short time having elapsed. The short time elapsed. Shorter. He, if you want to translate in order, we can say to the camp. He led back the legions. You could also say with a brief or short time elapsed, he led the legions back to camp. That would be a more comfortable English word order, but it is not necessarily what needs to happen. All right. This section actually isn't too terrible. So while these things are done, hike being a substantive, with, I didn't draw arrows here. Apologies. So I don't even know which one you'd want to consider. Probably this one. So all right. So with all our men occupied, who were in the fields the remaining left. So we have our relative clause. Sometimes they don't put commas and it's sad, but there's a relative clause here, right? So errant is going to go with qui. And then we have our main verb with really qui as this adjective subject. Okay. Right. This one also isn't too terribly bad. So, sequor is a deponent, so that this construction here, while it looks passive, is going to be translated as active. So something followed. And, oh, I did not. Wow. Okay. I didn't do my arrows here. I apologize. Okay. All right. All right. So while this is actually going to be describing dies along with cum plures. And if you notice, because continuos is accusative plural right here, it can't be the subject, which leaves tempestates as our subject. So storms followed for several continuous days. Which, the storms being which, both and then we have a verb here, which is the subject of, so which both kept our men in the camps and prohibited or prevented the enemy from battle. So not too terribly complicated there. Then moving on, we have meanwhile the barbarians sent out messengers to all parts. Nuntios is accusative, so we know it's going to be the direct object. Messengers, I cannot spell today. So I feel like I say that every video though, so maybe I just can't spell in general. All right, so now messengers to all parts, and then we have paucitatem K, and so paucitatem is accusative, this is genitive, this is dative, so we have no subject, so we're going to assume that the barbari are still the subject. And they told, you really can choose whether or not to put the they in. They told of the fewness of our soldiers to their own so this genitive here is going to be referring to paucitatem. And then we're going to continue. And how much, this is such a weird expression, how much of making loot and in perpetuity the power of their liberation was given if they expelled the Romans from the camp they showed. All right, so I translated it perpetuity. I translated it in order of how it came. But really and truly, you'd want to translate they showed and place it up here. Because we are talking about how they showed if they expelled the Romans, right? These would happen. So they showed how much of making loot and in perpetuity the power, and they showed that in perpetuity the power of their liberation was given if they expelled the Roman king. So they showed isn't just some external factor outside of this. It actually is the main verb of that section. All right. This next section isn't too terrible. I just forgot to draw any arrows on this. I apologize. Yeah. All right. So this one's pretty straightforward. So buy these things quickly. You could say swiftly, but quickly or swiftly, with a great multitude collecta, collected or gathered, but it is a great multitude gathered. The infantry, right, or you could say the footmen, and the cavalry came to camp. All right, we're in section 35. We are very close to being done with our translations for today. So, Kaiser, although we have a relative clause that we're going to translate, but not quite yet, because it won't make sense without our direct object, idem. So we're going to translate our main clause first, and then the relative clause. So although he was seeing the same thing, would be for a which, right here, quote, which had happened in previous days. Wow, I think I just got off of my aero train. Okay, which had happened in previous days. That if the enemy had been repelled, they would flee danger with celeritate. Nevertheless, having obtained around Kirketer 30 horsemen, whom Comius Atribas about, I missed a word. Should be de quo here. So about whom it was spoken before. So whom, we interrupted a relative clause with another relative clause. So whom Comius Atribas transported with himself. He, right, constituent means stood firm, but it also means he stopped the legions in battle line before the camp. Legiones is plural, our verb is singular, so that means it needs to be our direct object. Same thing here. We have a singular verb. Quos is plural and accusative. Comius is a nominative singular. All right, 2 slides left. 5 lines. We got this. So, with the battle having been joined, it'd be weird to translate diutius right here because we need this not first. So I would recommend at this moment looking for our verb. And what would be this subject? Or we can just translate in order, which is what I'm going to try to do. So for a long time, our soldiers attack. Impetu, these are genitive, and impetum is accusative. So we know that something's going to happen to this. So I'm going to go ahead and type in the between. So if our soldiers attack is going to be the accusative, then the enemies are probably the ones who are the subjects. So the enemy, then we have our main verb. This here would be another complementary infinitive, right? Was not able is not a complete thought. And so faire completes the thought. So for a long time, the enemy was not able to bear our soldiers' attack, and they turned back. All right. Okay. So you could also have said the enemy was not able to bear our soldiers' attack, our soldiers' attack for a long time. Which is how I initially translated it. But if we translate it in order, sometimes it'll make it easy to translate other things in order when it is necessary. All right, so which, quotes, having followed in such a space, and then quantum is going to be used a little bit differently than how we've seen. Normally, we would translate it as something like how much or how great, but it can actually also be translated as. As they were able to do by course and by force. They killed. Why did I say which? It should be whom. Because this day, I really hate how they change it like this. This is now the Romans. Okay, so whom, British, with the barbarians either way. They were able, whom having followed, the British, whom having followed in such a space as they, the Romans, were able to by course and by force. They killed very many of them. If you want to translate it literally, you would say out of them, but English would dictate you'd be just of them. Then, the long arrow. Okay. All right. Then with all the buildings burned, when all the buildings longe lateke, far and wide, burned, they took themselves back into Jew camp. All right. One last sentence. All right. So AODM DA is another ablative of time. So you could say on the same day, probably. The legates sent by the enemy came to Kaiser. Or you could translate it more in order and translate it as sent to Kaiser would be order. If we translate it in order, it would be the legates by the enemy sent to Kaiser, understanding that the enemy sent the legates, came about peace. And that is the end of book 4. I have a short translation assignment for you guys, 7 lines, at the beginning of book 6, which is what we jumped to. Friday, we will be doing some practice questions, like AP style practice questions. I haven't decided if they'll be on AP Classroom yet or not. I'm going to look through that and decide today or tomorrow, and I will let you know, obviously, on Friday. I will also put together kind of a list of information about what our AP test is going to look like, and then some just supply you guys some fact links to like facts and questions. All right.